Hello and welcome to another episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie, brought to you by Killer Podcasts, an Evergreen Podcasts network. I'm the titular Sean.
And I'm the very titular Carrie.
It's the show that takes you inside the unbelievable, the unexplainable, the macabre, and the bizarre and tries to find an answer. And for the past 4 weeks, we've been taking you on a little tour of Whitechapel, London, England in the gruesome autumn of 1888.
It's the East End, innit?
Oi! When the serial murderer known only as Jack the Ripper did his hideous crimes. Listen to the first 2 episodes of this series for a rundown, for Carrie's wonderfully researched rundown of the whole sordid affair, the deaths of 5 women in the streets of Whitechapel over the course of a few months. The hapless, sort of no answers at all police investigation. Last week, Caroline, you took us through some of the likeliest suspects that have been put forward for the Ripper murders, but of course, it's likely we'll never know who committed this crime.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so why do we bother talking about it today? I guess because it's fun, right?
Jack the Ripper, or like this aspect of it?
Well, yes.
Well, we talk about Jack the Ripper because it was the first real true crime mania, I would say. But it is fun to talk about a mystery, right? And it's fun to talk about weird conspiracy theories and magic, which is what we're doing today.
Exactly right. We are going to talk about some of the fringier theories on the Jack the Ripper crimes. These are some of the oddest balls of mud people have thrown at the wall in trying to come up with a solution for these murderers that again took place nearly 120 years ago. No, sorry, 134 years ago.
You've changed it every time.
Well, because I keep thinking
almost 100 years ago.
I just keep thinking turn of the century, so my brain goes to 1920, 1900. Sorry, boy.
Yeah.
We're going to start this week with a big name, Carrie. A big name. There was actually recently a History Channel series about this gentleman and the possibility, the case for his being Jack the Ripper. That's right. I'm talking about the American Ripper himself, H.H. Holmes. Real name Herman Webster Mudgett.
And this is someone we're definitely going to cover in the future, right?
Yes.
So we're not going to go too deep.
Exactly right. I'm not going to spend too much time on Holmes, not least because, as I will hopefully convince you quickly, I really don't think he was involved in these crimes. But he's a very interesting guy. There's no question about that. For those who are somehow... I feel like he's had a real cultural moment. Like we've had a Holmes-assance over the past...
Well, ever since that book, The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson came out.
Which I think is still being made into a movie slowly.
Yes. So it's an awesome, awesome book. It kind of goes into both the history of the Chicago World's Fair and also at the same time H.H. Holmes, who was operating during the Chicago World's Fair. And it sounds like it could be pretty dry, but I found it really fascinating.
Absolutely. And like I think the greatest true crime works do, it's a real like sense of time and place book. Like you're wandering around those streets. And in his famous murder castle.
Yes, yeah, so since then, and since I think it was Scorsese and DiCaprio that got the rights to create the film, it might be a miniseries actually. It's changed a lot over the years. But ever since then, people have become more and more interested in H.H. Holmes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He is often held up as America's first serial killer in much the way that Jack the Ripper is kind of the first, held up often as the first kind of iteration of the serial killer, the modern day serial killer generally. Holmes was a con man and, yes, certainly a murderer. He was convicted of 1 murder, but confessed to 27 while awaiting trial. And he was suspected, and is suspected today, of hundreds of crimes. Although, if you really look at the evidence, and I'll save this broader discussion for when we do an H.H. Holmes episode, Carrie, which, as you said, is certainly forthcoming at some point. It's just so much. There's so much material on this guy.
Yeah.
He may have only done like 9 murders.
Oh, only a light 9.
Well, only 9 murders. But compared to like 160 murders.
Still more than the canonical 5.
Yes, of course. There's this public imagination, though, of he has this murder castle and he's like gassing women and dropping them through chutes into a room in the basement where he cuts their heads open and then sells their skeletons.
Well, he definitely did a few of those.
And the castle was equipped kind of possibly to do all of those things, but I don't think he had the kind of numbers that people sometimes attribute to him.
That's fine.
Real bad guy, though.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so curious that Jeff Mudgett, Holmes's great-great-grandson, is so interested in talking about how related to H.H. Holmes he is.
Well, we all have family.
Mudgett is indeed Holmes's great-great-grandson. He believes himself to also be the great-great-grandson of Jack the Ripper, whom he says
same man
was H.H. Holmes.
Oh.
He wrote a book on this entitled Bloodstains. I think playing on the idea of like the stains of those crimes still being in Jeff's blood. Again, no one's making you go around talking about it, Jeff.
It's his therapy.
Well, and 2 things about Jeff Mudgett. I'm not impugning his character in any way, but just in terms of credibility for me with this story. I think it's interesting, and I said it was interesting that he likes talking about his murderous great-great-grandfather so much.
I don't know. If you've got kind of a macabre sensibility and, you're definitely related to this person, there's no way to not be related, you might as well lean into it.
But he also leans more toward I think he likes the image of Holmes as having murdered hundreds of women in this.
Well, if you're gonna lean, you might as well lean hard.
Yeah, so he's leaning hard, and so the series goes into because the History Channel, as I said, was it earlier this year or late last year?
One of those.
Earlier,
recently, the last year.
Within the last year, the History Channel did a series called American Ripper.
Which is on Hulu now, right?
It is now on Hulu, and Jeff Mudgett teams up with an ex-CIA agent to, as he says directly into camera at the beginning of the series, to find enough evidence to prove his theory that his great-great-grandfather was Jack the Ripper. So he and this CIA agent are rolling around Chicago and London, and it mostly seems like an excuse, and no problem with this, mostly seems like an excuse for the History Channel to just go through the details of both kind of gory series of crimes again.
Yeah, why not?
But every now and then they will talk to a local expert as they try to establish a firm kind of foot trail, a trail of breadcrumbs that puts H.H. Holmes in London during the Ripper murders.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they do, and I believe this is also in Jeff's book, but they do point to a pretty, I will admit, eerie gap. So the records of Holmes's life are actually pretty meticulous and well kept because he was
always doing frauds.
Yes, he was constantly running flim-flams in like a bunch of different states.
So you have paper trails.
So there's a paper trail for all of this stuff. And there is, in this otherwise pretty comprehensive record of what Holmes was up to in this time, there is just a gap from, and this chilled my shoulders when I saw it, from July 1888 to March 1889.
That's weird.
It is weird. And once they go to London, they also turned up a record of an H. Holmes booking a ship back to the U.S. in the weeks after Mary Kelly's murder.
It's interesting.
It is interesting. I'll point out that Holmes wasn't his name.
That was the name he was going by.
Yeah, but it was... So if you went to London to go do a bunch of murders, use a different fake name than the one you're going to open the pharmacy under, in just a couple of months.
I don't know. No press is bad press, maybe?
Now, Mudgett also says language analysis has suggested the Dear Boss letter was written by an American. Well, that has been said by several people. You might have even referenced that in the last episode.
I'm not sure about an American.
When we were talking about Tumblety?
Maybe. It's all a blur.
So people have pointed to some language used in the Dear Boss letter that apparently strongly suggests it was an American, not an Englishman, who wrote that letter. As a reminder for you and for our listeners, I know you don't need the reminder, Carrie. The Dear Boss letter, many have suggested, didn't come from Jack at all, right? But from somebody just trying to screw with police.
Yeah, I mean, there are thoughts that none of the letters are from the actual Jack the Ripper. Of course, they came up with the name, right? But maybe he didn't. Maybe they're all hoaxes. Yeah.
Mudgett says a computer analysis that he ran of the Dear Boss letter ran back a 97% chance that the letter was written by H.H. Holmes specifically.
Do we have like what is that software?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea, but I know that I think it's probably a custom program. He has a bunch of Holmes's journals that I think he was basing the quote language patterns on. Ultimately, the best they managed to do on the show is, again, recount both crime series, which are interesting historical details in and of themselves, while convincing us basically that the timeline and location could work, right? That they don't rule out H.H. Holmes as a suspect. For
reasonable doubt.
Reasonable doubt is what they're trying to sow here. But just for your and our listeners' edification, my thoughts on this. The methods of murder are just so obviously different here, and the motives are so obviously different. Because Holmes, all of the victims that we, have confirmed or close to confirmed on H.H. Holmes, he was murdering for profit. It was to directly steal their property, or to inherit from wives and ex-wives, or to commit insurance fraud.
Or to sell their skeletons to surgical schools.
He apparently sold skeletons to surgical schools, and sometimes to cover up previous crimes, which, many criminals do. But that's not what the Ripper was doing. The Ripper seems to have been striking randomly.
Much more sexualized.
Certainly sexual
much
motivation.
More hands-on.
And the people he's killing don't have any money.
Yeah.
So it's not a Holmesy crime. And even either the crimes he might have committed before this time or the crimes we know he committed after, there was always some kind of a profit motive involved. And he didn't rip anyone.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, he mostly kept his hands off if he's gassing people and such.
Yeah, he may have beaten a cousin to death when he was a teenager.
Who hasn't?
But the CIA agent in this History Channel show was like, so obviously if he was the Ripper, his methods evolved over time. It's like, yeah, but then they radically evolve again when he comes back to the U.S. and starts gassing people?
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
The reason Holmes looms large in the imagination is that kind of mechanized, efficient horror of the murder castle. But that is the most different thing from the kind of visceral thrill one imagines the Ripper getting from ripping.
Yeah.
So that closes the book on H.H. Holmes for me. Carrie, any thoughts on H.H. Holmes? Obviously, you'll have plenty of thoughts when we do a whole series on this, again, fascinating, weird, mess of a guy.
I mean, the time gap is very interesting, but there's never going to be a way to prove it, So it's certainly food for thought. I don't personally think the ways of killing and the reasons for killing are so different. I don't think they're related.
All right. Well, I promise we'll get to some more famous faces later in this podcast. But for now, I want to tell you about a guy you probably haven't heard of. His name, Carl Feigenbaum.
Okay.
Now, Feigenbaum, born 1840, was a German immigrant who was executed at Sing Sing Prison in New York on April 27th, 1896. The crime? Feigenbaum had brutally murdered his landlady. Let's run it back a little bit. In August of 1984, Juliana Hoffman...
1884 or 1984?
Did I say 1984?
Yeah.
In August 1894, Juliana Hoffman, 56 years old, and her 16-year-old son, Michael, decided they needed to supplement their income, so they figured they would put an ad out for a lodger. And the first person to move in, unfortunately for the Hoffmans, was Carl Feigenbaum. Now, Carl said he didn't have any money for rent when he was moving in, because he had just lost his job. But he assured Ms. Hoffman that he had been promised a new job as a florist, and once he was paid, he would have the money for her on September 1st. Mm-hmm. September 1st came around, And Michael Hoffman, by the way, Michael and Juliana were sharing a bedroom once they took the lodger in. The lodger was kind of sleeping in Michael's old room, and he was curled up on a small sofa at the foot of his mother's bed.
Okay.
On the morning of September 1st, Michael was awoken by a scream, and when he looked up, Feigenbaum was looming over his mother's bed with a knife. He apparently turned toward Michael and brandished the weapon, and Michael just jumped out the window and then watched through the window as Feigenbaum stabbed his mother in the throat and then
God.
cut straight across from left to right.
That's horrible.
Feigenbaum then dropped the knife, escaped out the window of his own bedroom in the house, washed his hands at the pump in the backyard, and escaped through an alleyway to the street. But by this time, obviously, Michael Hoffman was sprinting through the streets and screaming someone had just killed his mother, and Feigenbaum was arrested basically immediately.
Good.
Yes, good. Kind of similar to the Man from the Train, the Henry Miller story.
Yeah.
With a lodger or a workman like coming into town, argument over money, and then here we go. Mm-hmm. Now, at first, Carl said he did not do this, and it had to have been another guy.
Stop.
No, seriously. He said that he used sometimes let his friend, and this had never been mentioned before, the family knew nothing about this. He said he would let his friend Jacob Weibel sneak in and sleep in the room at night, sometimes. Mm-hmm. Nobody bought that even for 1 second. And at trial, the story that's painted is Carl wanted to steal some money from the cupboard to cover his own rent that he was going to pay Hoffman later that day, presumably. And Mrs. Hoffman woke up and caught him in the act. Carl Feigenbaum is a fake name. His real name's apparently probably Anton Lahn, but it's a little hard to track because all the papers ran with Feigenbaum the whole time. Mm-hmm. He was convicted quickly. There were 2 years of unsuccessful appeals from his lawyers on the basis of insanity, and he died in the electric chair in April of 1896.
Well, he sounds like a dick, but how's this related to Jack the Ripper, Sean?
Well, after Feigenbaum's death, there was no mention of this previous to his death, but after his death, his lawyer, a William Lawton, made the following public statement. I have a statement to make.
Okay.
Which may throw some light on the murder for which the man I represented was executed. Now that Feigenbaum is dead and nothing more can be done for him in this world, I want to say as his counsel that I am absolutely sure of his guilt in this case. And I feel morally certain that he's the man who committed many, if not all, of the Whitechapel murders. Here are my reasons, and on this statement I pledge my honor. When Feigenbaum was in the Tombs awaiting trial, I saw him several times. The evidence in his case seemed so clear that I cast about for a theory of insanity. Certain actions denoted a decided mental weakness somewhere. When I asked him point blank, "Did you kill Mrs. Hoffman?" he made his reply, "I have for years suffered from a singular disease which induces an all-absorbing passion. This passion This passion manifests itself in a desire to kill and mutilate the women who falls in my way. At such times I am unable to control myself."
Never do that character again, Sean.
On my next visit to the Tombs, I asked him whether he had not been in London at various times during the whole period covered by the Whitechapel murders. "Yes, I was," he answered. I asked him whether he could not explain some of these cases, on the theory which he had suggested to me, and he simply looked at me in reply. Mm-hmm. So this is a big old press conference for this guy to hold to say, my client did not tell me he was Jack the Ripper.
It's very unusual for a lawyer to do this.
Some lawyers do really like being on television.
No, I know,
you think of Norm Pattis, that guy who everybody was just making fun of after the Alex Jones trial.
Right, but I mean, it's unusual for like someone to die, a defendant, and then to come out and be like, yeah, I thought he was guilty the whole time. And he's Jack the Ripper.
Yes.
I mean, obviously the last part, but like most lawyers don't talk about their cases like that.
He's a defense lawyer who just lost a trial, presumably badly. Several years of unsuccessful appeals. Maybe he's like, hey, just so you guys know,
Hail Mary.
I lost because my client was literally Jack the Ripper.
So, I mean, can't do anything about that.
No one at the time really made much of Lawton's dramatic press conference. It did make the papers, but the theory didn't gain traction, even with Lawton's own law partner. The New York Times printed Hugh Pentecost's comments. That's the law partner.
Pentecost?
Yeah, he's a religious man.
Good God.
His comments were printed as follows. I do not like to spoil a good story, but I take no stock in my colleague's story myself. Well, as to facts, Mr. Lawton, of course, is able to tell more than I, as I only knew our client to talk through an interpreter. In Feigenbaum, I found nothing in his homicidal method to remind me of the Ripper.
Okay.
What he was saying there is he's pretty sure the client doesn't speak English, so he's not sure where Lawton was doing this interview with him.
Right.
Feigenbaum wouldn't come back into fashion as a Ripper suspect until 2005, Caroline, when true crime author and former British homicide detective Trevor Marriott put him forward in Jack the Ripper, the 21st Century Investigation. Marriott claims that before his time as kind of an itinerant Manhattan gardener, Feigenbaum was a crewman aboard a German merchant ship called the Reiher. And he says that he located the records that confirm he was a crewman on this ship, and the Reiher was docked in British ports near Whitechapel in the fall of 1888, which is another one of those kind of make your back of your neck prickle moments. Marriott also points out a number of unsolved killings of women, particularly sex workers, that may have fallen along Feigenbaum's global travel path. So he's kind of making a man from the train argument, actually, but based on the ocean. I will point out, and I must point out, that unlike axe murders of whole families like the Jameses we're looking at in The Man from the Train, unsolved murders of sex workers are never hard to find.
Yeah.
At any time or place.
They're not rare.
In the world or in history. Yeah. For example, just as an example of one of the crimes he points to as another possible Feigenbaum, Carrie Brown was found badly mutilated on a bed in a cheap hotel in the Bowery.
Oh, yeah. I think I mentioned that one last week.
In April 1891. Yes, because the papers immediately proclaimed that the Ripper had come to New York. Mm-hmm. Now, we keep talking about Jack the Ripper, and I think you may have paid...
We sure do, Sean.
You may have paid some lip service to this last week, but some people at the time, most notably Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
The writer of Sherlock Holmes.
Of course, the writer of Sherlock Holmes and noted believer in fairies.
We'll talk about that another time.
Advanced the theory that Jack the Ripper could have been a woman.
Yes, Sean. She could have been.
A Jill the Ripper, if you will. Mm-hmm. You know, it made me think of that old doctor was a woman thing. Because it's like, well, maybe the reason they never suspected is because people were talking about Jack had to be a doctor.
The Ripper was a woman.
The Ripper was a woman. The doctor was a woman. Theorists on this imagined a, quote, mad midwife who would be able to come and go at all hours, covered in blood, without raising anybody's attention.
And she had to know... She had to be a midwife to know where the uterus was?
No. If you were dressed as... She didn't even have to be a midwife, but she maybe, if people saw a woman walking through the streets all covered in blood at all hours of the night, they would just assume she was a midwife coming from a birth.
I see.
You know, all these births that are happening all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
It's a crowded area. But it's also... But you know, Conan Doyle also suggested a midwife... or an actual midwife would have the anatomical knowledge to do this ripping that we're talking about.
If a woman of the time knows what a uterus is, she knows where it is.
Yes, so you don't need her to be a midwife to explain that.
Like, I know, like, the ballpark, you know? I think any woman would.
Yeah, people are fascinated by trying to justify this need for anatomical knowledge, and I think it plays into the fascination with the gentleman Jack kind of icon.
I absolutely agree.
In any case, DNA analysis on the backs of those stamps on the 1888 letters to police. The funny thing about these letters is they've been analyzed with handwriting and with language and with DNA by a bunch of different teams who in some cases have come to different conclusions. Mm-hmm. But one of these teams did say that the sender was probably female.
Or she's the one who licked the stamp.
Or a lady licked the stamp. That's true, too.
But again, it doesn't necessarily matter because the Ripper might not have written any of these.
Yes. Oh, yes, all completely true. But this is all goes into the discussion of Jack the Ripper as a woman. There have never been any convincing suspects raised at this. In fact, there's only one, really, who seems to have been mentioned in the papers or speculated about at the time, and that was Mary Piercy. Mary was born Mary Wheeler. She got Piercy from a former common-law husband, former by this time. At some point, Mary had started living with a furniture remover. All the jobs sound so glamorous in Whitechapel.
Furniture remover?
He doesn't bring it in. He only brings it out. Only bring it out!
Is he like a repo man?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, furniture remover. Frank Hogg.
Oh, boy.
Now, Frank, at the time, also had a live-in girlfriend named Phoebe Styles.
Phoebe Styles is like a trendy name.
It is a trend. It's such a trendy name that she also named her baby Phoebe.
I would too.
Because apparently at some point Phoebe got pregnant, which you would think would make it awkward. The three of them, the house is getting smaller now. And Frank married Phoebe, oddly enough, at Mary's urging. From what I can tell, Mary was like, "Oh, you guys can't have this baby out of wedlock. You should definitely get married."
Well, it's a supportive throuple situation.
And she moved out and to let the family be together. The baby was named Phoebe Hogg.
Not as good.
Not as good as Phoebe Styles. And Mary found her own place to live. And as you say, this seems like she's just giving them their space, and this is a pretty healthy throuple.
Yeah. Until
on October 24th, 1890... Mary invited Phoebe over for a visit at her new place. Some neighbors reported screaming sometime around 4 p.m., but it doesn't seem like anyone investigated. I guess because screams were so common in Whitechapel.
Yep.
Later on, Mary Piercy was seen pushing a stroller sometime after dark. And even later that night, in separate parts of the neighborhood, separated by about a mile or so, Phoebe's corpse was found on a pile of rubble with her head crushed almost off her shoulders. And her baby, Phoebe, a.k.a. Tiggy, apparently smothered.
Oh.
And the blood-soaked black stroller that she had arrived at the house in were found in separate locations.
Yikes.
Mary was hanged on December 23rd, 1890, and I think she was pointed to as a Ripper possibility only because some people were casting about for a female suspect, and I guess just women murdering was hard to imagine, so this one stuck in the mind.
Yeah, I think that's what... I mean, this is so targeted.
It couldn't be more different from... it's crushing and not cutting or ripping.
There's a baby involved. Yeah. I mean, it's a very targeted crime of passion sort of situation. Not really related to ripping at all, but, ladies doing it for themselves, I guess.
It's nice. You love to see it.
Not this one.
Let's finish out our Lady Rippers here with even more so than Mary Piercy. This is absurd. There's no connection here. But I found it to be a really interesting story, so I want to tell you about Lizzie Halliday. Born Lizzie McNally, an Irish-American serial murderess, convicted of 4 slayings in 1894. Lizzie's perhaps most notable as the first woman ever to be sentenced to death by electric chair in the world.
Wow. Good for her.
She wasn't executed. Even better for her. That sentence was later commuted. More on that in a moment. Born Lizzie McNally, Lizzie moved to New York, from Ireland with her family at age 3 or 4. And later in life would go on to have a colorful series of marriages. Mm-hmm. She married a Charles Hopkins in 1879, who died a year later. We're not sure how. She then married Artemus Brewer in 1881. He died less than a year later. We're not sure how. No reports on that. Her third husband was Hiram Parkinson, who left her within a year of marriage. He might have seen her eyeing the knives in the drawer and gotten the right idea. After Parkinson, she married George Smith, a Civil War vet, who had served with Brewer, her second husband. She fled his house and the state after apparently attempting to poison his tea. Mm-hmm. But she would next marry Charles Haystel of Vermont. You can't keep her down. She's going to find love.
I guess.
She vanished 2 weeks after that wedding, just in the wind, and would later resurface in Pennsylvania under a different name, where she was arrested for burning down the shop that she had just opened in an attempted insurance scam.
Good Lord.
Serial killers, Carrie, often have insurance scams and things like that. They're always tricksters. They love getting one over on people.
I guess so.
1889, now Lizzie Brown, she had changed her first name back to Lizzie at this point, and her last name, she was going by Brown. She became housekeeper and then wife
Ooh.
of
Maria von Trapp.
Of 70-year-old widowed farmer Paul Halliday. They apparently had a tumultuous marriage for the next 2 years, until finally one day the house and barn both burned down, with Paul's mentally handicapped son John locked inside.
No.
Yeah. John died, of course. Lizzie, there was no positive proof that Lizzie had done it, but everyone just it sounds like everyone, her husband included, just kind of figured she did it because she had openly hated the guy.
Wow.
She was sent briefly to an asylum. Then she was declared cured and sent home.
I don't think so.
Oh, within weeks of her coming home, Paul disappeared. Her husband.
She went back to him? He took her back?
Yeah. And then he vanished.
What magical vagine does this woman have?
She comes back to... Well, I don't know how long she was there. It might have been you can't come back in, you killed my son, and then she just kills him.
Oh my God.
I think it was an argument between the two of them because... So anyway, people ask, oh, what happened to Paul? And Lizzie said, oh, he just went off to a nearby town to do some masonry work.
Didn't even name the town?
He's 70 years old. He's 70 years old. He's going to go lay some bricks, bring in some extra cash. Mm-hmm. He presumably has money, by the way, because that's why Lizzie married him, right?
I would think.
The neighbors immediately knew something wasn't right, of course, and a search warrant was executed on September 4th, at which point 2 dead women were found buried in the hay in the barn. Both of them had been shot.
Who were they?
They were identified as Margaret and Sarah McQuillan, who were 2 members of the family that Lizzie had stayed with in Philadelphia when she was running her insurance scam.
Jeez.
Lizzie couldn't be questioned at this point because as soon as police entered her residence, she started tearing at her clothes and babbling incoherently, which she basically did until they packed her off to an asylum. She was at this point, by the way, how old do you think she is?
35.
Exactly right.
Good.
6 husbands down, 35 years old. Paul was found mutilated, shot, and buried beneath the floorboards. And in jail, Lizzie then refused to eat. She would attack anyone entering her cell, including, they brought in the sheriff's wife, I guess, look, it's another woman. It's another woman. Can't you guys get along?
It's another of women.
And she physically attacked her. She tried to hang herself. She cut her own throat, or attempted to, with some glass. But eventually, they did manage to try her and sentence her to death. But as I said, the sentence was commuted, and Lizzie would spend the rest of her life, 24 more years, in Mattawan State Hospital for the criminally insane, until she died of kidney disease in 1918. Now, during all of this furor with the trial, the sheriff of Sullivan County made an offhand comment to the press that
That's it.
that Lizzie Halliday was, quote, probably connected to the Whitechapel murders.
He's probably just fucking around.
Which she apparently spoke of incessantly. She was obsessed by the...
Yeah, I could see her being interested.
And the local papers did make much of that
Of course.
assertion. But of course, it's very silly. I just thought she was such a colorful character
Yeah.
that I had to cover her here. But we're going to get back to what really happened. We're going to...
Oh, jeez.
We're going to get into the royal conspiracies and the black magic after the break.
Oh, boy.
Listen to Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time podcast.
It's a fun show about weird stuff.
New episodes every Wednesday, ya eggheads. I'm Art.
And I'm Andy.
And Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time is a podcast about conspiracies, the paranormal, UFOs, unsolved mysteries.
We're going to be discussing the Kennedy assassinations.
Oh yeah, that's his nickname, Finger Banging Bob Lazar. Give me some aliens with some good frickin' spacecraft.
The whole enchilada.
The only thing bigger than Bigfoot's feet are our egos.
If you like simulation theory, ancient history, egghead science, and Mandela effect, that kind of stuff.
So check it out. New episodes every Wednesday. All the links you need on MrBunkersConspiracyTime.com.
And we'll see you in the bunker.
Welcome back. When last we left you, we went over the first of these kind of fringe theories about Jack the Ripper. Caroline would call them fringe theories. I call them unvarnished truth, of course. We covered H.H. Holmes. We covered some murderous women. And we also covered the, I would say, strangely plausible Carl Feigenbaum.
I don't know.
Oh, I don't think he did it. Strangely plausible.
Vaguely plausible.
And now it's finally, I know our listeners have been waiting for it, it's finally time to talk about the royal family of England and how they were involved in the deaths of these 5 women.
And, sorry for their loss.
And sorry for their recent loss. Yes, of course. We're all taking the Queen's death terribly.
Well, just saying.
So first I want to talk about Queen, I guess this is Queen Lizzie's ancestor in some kind of way, Prince Albert Victor. Maybe you can fill me in on the relationship there.
Prince Albert Victor was the first born son of Victoria and Albert, Queen Victoria and Albert.
Albert being Bertie, the famous Bertie they always talk about, right? No?
No.
He wasn't?
Bertie was Queen Elizabeth's dad.
Oh.
So Albert Victor was supposed to be the king eventually, but that didn't happen. I think it went to George.
Is that because he was like dumb and no one liked him?
No, I think he died.
Oh.
So I think it went to George, who was Elizabeth's grandfather. So I think Victoria's her great-grandfather.
But he was just kind of a dumb guy, right? And kind of gawky, and nobody really liked him. And they really liked his mom.
Probably. I don't know much about him.
His mom was Princess Alexandra. In any case, as far as I know, Prince Albert Victor was not actually implicated by any, newspaper or rumor that I can find at the time of the murders. However, Philippe Julien's 1962 biography of Edward VII mentions in passing that, quote, the Prince and the Duke of Bedford were both rumored to be responsible when the killings were going on.
Interesting. Did you just make that up?
It's the first mention anyone's ever found of him in connection with these crimes. Like, it's the first one anyone can identify. It has been suggested that Julien, who was a correspondent of Thomas Stowell, the writer who would implicate Albert Victor a few years later, they were correspondents, so it's possible that Stowell had shared that story with Julien.
Okay.
So, the theory really gets out there, and I do mean out there, when Thomas Stowell writes about it in 1970, in an article called The Solution, that was published in the Criminologist Journal as, interestingly enough, I think you'll appreciate this, kind of a blind item.
Really?
The culprit in this article.
This prince.
He's referred to as S.
Oh.
Yeah. The culprit is referred to as S, but there's enough clues that you know he's talking about Albert. He's like, this high starched collar wearing
son of a
handicapped
bitch.
noble. Stowell claims to have used the personal papers of William Gull as his primary source in this article. Sir William Gull being the physician to both the king and the prince at this time.
Yeah, so the royals have private physicians. They're always on call, and they only really treat them.
Right.
So that's what William Gull is.
Yes, William.
Family doctor.
William Withy Gull, who we will talk more about in just a moment, I promise. So he claims that Gull's papers are his main source, but this is where it does get difficult, because we don't have access to those papers.
Who has them?
Well, no one else besides Stowell has seen them, the papers that he's talking about. He died days after this article was published.
Oh my God.
And his son burned all of his papers.
So he was in ownership of Gull's papers, so he says.
He says.
Or do we know that for sure?
I think the situation implies either that he made this shit up whole cloth, or he got it out of letters of William Gull that he had that were then burned by his son.
Was his son supposed to do this?
His son said, I didn't read any of it. I read just enough of everything to make sure nothing was important before I burned it.
Bro.
So, Now, the mere fact of Stoll's papers being burned might be the best argument for this theory. As you'll find out in a moment, the evidence is pretty thin on the ground otherwise, and, it does kind of send a shiver down your spine when you hear that they were, like, mysteriously lost, all these papers that could have proved or disproved this theory.
Right. I mean, it is ironic that he died right after.
Yes. So, Stoll claims, although that's not how cover-ups ever actually work. You don't kill someone after they spill the beans, because...
No, I'm just saying it's ironic.
Yes. Stoll claims, based on what he says Gull's papers say, that number one, Eddie, Prince Albert Victor was called Eddie by everyone.
Well, I don't know if one of his names was Edward.
He was the Duke of Clarence and Avondale, but I don't know. In any case, Stoll claims Eddie was a secret homosexual, that Eddie had contracted syphilis during his military service in the West Indies. I think the only reason he tries to convince us that Eddie was secretly gay is because he thinks only gay people get syphilis. Or people who frequent prostitutes, of course. The late stages of the disease would then have driven Eddie mad and compelled him to commit the Ripper murders. Stoll says the royal family knew, quote, definitely after the second murder, and possibly even after the first, that it was Prince Albert Victor who was responsible, but it wasn't until after the double event that they intervened and packed him away to a private mental institution. But then, Albert Victor escaped to commit the final murder of Mary Kelly, which was his masterpiece. And Stoll puts the cherry on the top of all this by comparing the mutilations of the victims to the way rich English nobles might clean and truss up a deer on one of their hunts. Now, all this said, court and royal records show Eddie not even being in London on the dates of the murders.
Was he at an institution?
No, he was not.
Okay.
And there is otherwise no evidence that he was suffering from syphilis, so this whole thing kind of falls apart immediately when you poke at it.
Right. How did he die?
Eddie? Not from syphilis. He died of influenza.
Okay. Why... If he was driven mad by syphilis, I mean, I've heard the explanation given before that maybe Jack the Ripper was someone who had contracted tuberculosis or syphilis or some sort of wasting disease from a prostitute and was killing sex workers in order to get revenge for his soon-to-be death.
Right. The best Stoll has here is that the syphilis just made him crazy.
Right.
And then he was
you would
hunting
think
these
that
women,
he would kill men.
And then he was hunting these women like they were deer. Probably with some kind of I feel like when people go crazy and start cutting up sex workers, it's always like the voice of God is telling them to.
Yeah, I guess. It's just a roundabout way to get there.
I agree.
Why not just say he hated sex workers and wanted to kill them? Why do the whole, he was secretly gay and he had the syphilis and and then he went crazy and that's why he killed them?
Well, I agree. It adds so many different points that you can refute this on that it's kind of crazy.
Well, it just zigzags around. I mean, just take the path of least resistance here.
Yes. Well, I will hopefully Stoll will take that into account when he writes his next one.
He's dead.
Yes, he is. But I wanted to bring that theory up because it's kind of a precursor. Royal involvement, you'll see, Carrie, in the Ripper crimes stayed in the public imagination. And in 1973, Prince Albert Victor would show up again in a popular theory, this time as a hapless bystander. The BBC, no less an institution than the British Broadcasting Company, aired Jack the Ripper in 1973, a kind of hybrid documentary fiction program that featured two fictional detectives named Barlow and Watt.
Of the time or of 1973?
They were detectives like in Gaslamp, London.
Okay.
Investigating apparently mostly true evidence and information. Mostly true. The final episode of the series features testimony from a guy calling himself Joseph Sickert, a.k.a. Joseph Gorman, his birth name. Gorman claims his illegitimate father, Walter Sickert,
And we talked about him.
Yes, he
The
claims...
painter.
Yes, we did, because Patricia Cornwall implicated Sickert in her book. Joseph Gorman claims that Sickert was his illegitimate father, and that Sickert told him the whole sordid story that I'm about to tell you.
Wow, spill the tea, Queen.
I will add, Carrie, that this framework the BBC used of a fictional detective or reporter hearing the story from Sickert's descendant, even, is exactly later used in Alan Moore's From Hell, which is, if you're interested in this royal conspiracy theory, then that's the version I would suggest reading. It's obviously all fiction, but any account of this theory is fiction, so that's the best written and the funnest one.
And they do a royal adjacent thing in the Jack the Ripper miniseries with Michael Caine as well.
Yes.
But please, spill the tea.
Well, first things first. Gorman's Catholic grandmother, as it turns out, secretly married Prince Albert Victor, making Gorman's mother the rightful heir to the throne.
Okay.
He says the Ripper murders were committed by Dr. William Gall, that aforementioned physician, as part of a cover-up conspiracy executed by the royal family. Mm-hmm. The BBC program was later turned into a book called The Ripper File in 1975. And meanwhile, journalist Stephen Knight became obsessed with Gorman's story and published his own research in the smash hit book, the very unfortunately named book, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
In 1976. So, here's Gorman's story. Let me spill the tea for you, Carrie, because this is very soapy. Mm-hmm. Gorman says that Albert Victor's mother, Alexandra, introduced Walter Sickert, the famous painter, to her son to teach him about art. Now, royals probably do this all the time. Come on, Rodin, let's talk about Plato, or whatever. Albert Victor soon began an affair with one of Sickert's models, a woman named Annie Crook. Now, apparently, Albert and Annie had Eddie and Annie had a daughter named Alice. And Albert Victor quietly put the mistress and her baby up in a nice flat on Cleveland Street. Modest, but, comfortable. Mm-hmm. Queen Victoria and British Prime Minister of the time, Lord Salisbury.
Oh, of the steak.
Yeah, I love his gravy. When they found out, they decided they couldn't risk a revolution in the streets due to this potential Catholic heir floating around. And so Albert was basically placed on house arrest by his family, while Annie was declared insane by Dr. Gall and packed off to an asylum.
Were they still so freaked out about Catholicness at that time?
Yeah, probably. But for legal reasons, they wouldn't have been concerned about the succession, and I'll tell you about that in a sec. Mm-hmm. Annie Crook, for her part, would drift in and out of institutions for the next 30 years before dying in one in 1920 at age 35. Meanwhile, little Alice was left in the care of one of Annie Crook's close friends who lived in the Whitechapel district, Miss Mary Jane Kelly.
Ruh-roh.
Now, at some point, Mary Jane Kelly told her friends, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, and Elizabeth Stride, this whole sordid story. And they decided they could make a quick buck by blackmailing the government. Mm-hmm. And then Lord Salisbury himself organized the conspiracy to stage the women's murders as a cover-up of the cover-up.
Okay.
Gull himself, with his anatomical knowledge, was tasked as the murderer. And so he...
Oh, man.
And then he drove... No, well, at least the way Alan Moore tells it, he comes at it with gusto.
Well, I mean, again, that's fictional.
Yes, yeah. I'm sure Mr... well, I'm not sure.
I'm sure Sir William Gull was boring as hell.
I don't know that he wasn't a murderer, but I don't have any reason to believe he was. Mm-hmm. He apparently drove around with coachman John Netley. The assistant commissioner of Scotland Yard was also involved. His name was Sir Robert Anderson. Mm-hmm. And these three guys would work as kind of a street team, luring these women into a carriage before killing them. And then Gull and Netley had their own thing to do with the locations where the women were dumped. Meanwhile, Gorman says Netley tried to kill young Alice twice, the baby. But after the second attempt, he was chased down the street by witnesses and eventually, grief-stricken, threw himself into the Thames to drown.
Now, there were 4 women mentioned. There was Mary Kelly, and she told 3 friends, but there's a canonical 5 victims.
Yes, and the other one, Catherine Eddowes, if you'll remember, Carrie, had used the fake name, the false name of Mary Kelly.
She sure
It
did.
was Mary Ann Kelly or something like that.
When she was taken in by the police for being, drunk? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the premise here is that, the 4 victims he intended upon were arranged in the shape of a cross over Whitechapel. Mm-hmm. Gull never meant to kill Eddowes at all, and it was just a case of mistaken identity.
Why did he want to put them in a cross?
Well, this is a whole thing. William Gull now I'm still speaking in Gorman's narrative here. William Gull and Sir Charles Warren, the Commissioner of Police in London, were both Freemasons.
In real life or just fictionally?
Only fictionally.
Okay, we don't have any evidence of them being Freemasons in real life.
I can confirm neither of them was.
Okay.
But Gorman says they were both secret Freemasons, and the police acted to protect Warren's Masonic cronies, while William Gull acted to turn the murders into a grand-scale Masonic ritual that would help the guild usher in the New World Order.
So basically 2 birds, 1 stone.
Exactly.
Like, we got to get rid of these ladies anyway. Might as well make it freaky.
He's doing magic that will ensure the Masons can dominate the backgrounds of power for the next several hundred years.
Okay.
The book, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, claims that these killings bear resemblance to Masonic ritual murders.
Is that a real thing?
Not that I know of, but it has
It's like satanic ritual murders.
Well, it's exactly like that because Masons and Satanists are both kind of whipping boys for frightened Catholics, like bedtime stories, basically.
Mm-hmm. Nightmare stories.
Nightmare stories. So, all of the victims, Carrie, had their throats cut from left to right.
Which probably would suggest the person was right-handed.
And doing it from behind. But you're thinking so mundanely, Carrie. You need to think...
Now, if they were doing it from behind, they would be left-handed.
You need to think magically.
I always do.
Because the stated ritual penalty for revealing Masonic secrets, revealing secrets of the lodge, is to have one's throat cut from left to right.
Is that real?
These are genuinely, these are secrets.
Yeah, but like Scientology have secrets, and we all know it.
Right. No. These things I think are actual connections.
Okay.
The intestines had been removed and placed over the left shoulder. And this brings us to Carrie. Do you remember the? Was it near the Eddowes murder? The inscription on the wall.
The Jews are the ones who will not be blamed for nothing.
The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing.
Yes.
Jews spelled Juwes. Mm-hmm. And we thought, what a weird misspelling.
Sure.
Let me tell you a little story that the Masons tell each other.
Please.
When the Temple of Solomon was being built, the guy in charge was a Mason, of course, named Grand Master Hiram Abiff. And he was murdered by 3 ne'er-do-well Masonic initiates named Jubello, and Jubilum.
Is this real? Is this really
I'm
in
sure
scripture?
it didn't really happen.
No, is it really in scripture?
It's loosely based on a Bible story, and the Masons have expanded it. It is a Masonic parable, yes.
Are the names Jubella and Jubima? And
yes,
okay.
that part's real.
Okay.
These men are collectively referred to in Masonic dogma as the 3 Jews, Juwes, because their names all start with Ju.
Okay.
This is all weird to me, but this is true. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the punishment for these men for killing Grandmaster Hiram Abiff, Carrie, was, quote, the breast being torn open and the heart and vitals taken out and thrown over the shoulder.
So not the intestines, but close enough.
The vitals, I mean,
yeah,
pretty specific. There were triangular cuts on Catherine Eddowes' face.
Well, we all know triangles are very Illuminati.
Both pointing down and pointing up. These represent the 2 triangles symbolizing Royal Arch Masonry.
Is that real?
No idea. Near Mary Kelly's body, police found 2 brass rings, 2 brass farthings, and several brass pennies. Mm-hmm. Brass is a sacred metal to Masons, apparently. And during initiations, Masons have to remove all metal coins and rings from their person before they go through a ritual to get to a new degree. Mm-hmm. They're also known to wear leather aprons during these rituals.
Leather apron.
And if I may, finally, Eddowes was found in Mitre Square. Mm-hmm. And the mitre and the square are both important symbols in Freemasonry. A mitre like a holy rod, you know.
That is interesting.
So, all of those things together, for Mr. Knight, say this was definitely a Masonic ritual. I will add a few other details. Gorman really does seem to be the son of a woman named Alice Crook, whose mother really was Annie Crook, so that part's real.
Okay, the names are real.
Well, and she lived in Whitechapel. That story's true, except that there's no evidence to suggest that he's related to Sickert or to Prince Albert Victor.
Did Alice ever get killed? I guess not.
No.
Because she had the kid.
She had the kid. A woman, he never said Alice got killed. He said they tried to kill her.
Right.
A woman named Elizabeth Cook lived at 6 Cleveland Street a little while before the Ripper murders, the year before. Could that have been a misspelling, Knight wonders, of Annie Elizabeth Crook? That's a stretch, right?
A little.
From Elizabeth Cook to Annie Elizabeth Crook.
I mean, maybe.
But
I don't know.
None of these are uncommon names, is my problem.
Right, exactly. They're not uncommon names.
And the other problem with that one is that Cleveland Street, the addresses from 4 to 14 were demolished in early 1888. So before the April 1888 raid that supposedly grabbed this poor woman and bundled her off to the asylum. Mm-hmm. There just were no houses there. Oops. Other problems. Albert Victor, as we mentioned, he wasn't in town at the time of the murders. And in fact, he was in Heidelberg, Germany from June to August 1884, which is before the murders, of course, but when Annie Crook would have had to be conceived. Mm-hmm. So,
Alice Crook.
Yes, I'm sorry. When Alice Crook was likely conceived. Mm-hmm. Now, in adulthood, Alice Crook claimed her father's name was William Crook, which was Annie's father's name. The father space was blank on Alice's birth certificate, so either that's because they just didn't know who Alice's dad was. I mean, Knight obviously suggests that's because of the secrecy of, oh no, it's the prince.
Right.
But either they just didn't know, or it was her dad and they didn't want to write it down.
Yeah.
Next, and I mentioned this before, Carrie, any secret marriage that Albert Victor would have had, a important part of the story, certainly for the guy telling it, for Gorman, is that his great-grandmother or whatever, his grandmother got married to the prince because that would make his mother the rightful heir to the throne in his mind. But any secret marriage that Albert Victor would have wouldn't count. There's like they call it the Royal Succession Act or something that they instituted in the late 1700s.
Yeah, I think they recently changed that, or Queen Elizabeth did. That's why women can be, like the firstborn woman, a daughter can be a queen automatically now.
Sorry, not that part. This is
No, I know. I'm just saying it's the Royal Succession Act.
Well, then maybe this is a different law. This is a law that says if you have a secret marriage, if you have a marriage that's not blessed.
It's all part of one big thing.
So now if you have a secret marriage that's not blessed by the...
Well, they might have kept that part.
So if Albert Victor had an illegitimate daughter, she wouldn't have had any claim to the throne. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, still wouldn't today. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Oh, this whole narrative, of course, of all of them being friends and gossiping about this baby. We, of course, don't know that the Ripper victims knew each other. Mm-hmm. Much less that they knew Annie Crook, who lived on the other side of town from them. The bodies all, pathologists seem to agree, appear to have been killed where they were left, not murdered in a carriage and then brought somewhere and dropped. Mm-hmm. Damningly, William Gall actually apparently suffered a stroke. I'm not laughing because of the stroke, but he suffered a stroke in 1887 that retired him from practice because he was partly paralyzed and could no longer speak.
You don't have to speak to murder someone.
No, and it does give you like an even scarier image, I guess, of like a shambling, mumbling Jack, but...
Yeah, but no, I don't think he was whipping around the East End
there was
all hours of the night.
There was no record of John Netley, the coachman, trying to kill babies. Nor did
Man, poor John Netley.
really character assassination here. He just seemed like
He's just a coachman.
he didn't even drown. He was crushed under the wheels of his own van.
Oh, no.
In 1903 after he crashed it into an obelisk. You know, they have these kind of Egyptoid
An obelisk, Sean? Sounds like a
Freemason.
Masonic murder.
Masonic plot. He was thrown under the horses who didn't kill him, but then the wheels ran over him and he died.
All right, crashed into an obelisk. It sounds like he was
Masoned?
disposed of by the Masons.
Maybe. It could be. Actually, fuck, we got to write a book. This is a bestseller.
Probably.
Now, as I mentioned, Lord Salisbury and Gull...
I love steak.
and Gull were not actually Freemasons, nor was Sir Robert Anderson, the
Well, publicly at least.
yes, true, but publicly, the police commissioner. Anderson actually also wasn't in the country at the time; he was in Switzerland. And when this was pointed out tonight, like right after his book came out, he said publicly that, "Oh, yeah, I guess I didn't." Notice that. Well, you know what? I think it was probably Walter Sickert was the third person in the conspiracy then. And then after this came out, Joseph Gorman, who was still claiming to be Walter Sickert's son, quickly retracted his whole story in the Sunday Times.
Jesus.
Quote, "It was a hoax, a whopping fib."
Oh, boy. Okay. So he really went back on it.
Yeah, fully. And yet, this theory is still kind of trotted out. I don't think it's trotted out seriously too often. But it did implant in the public consciousness, I think, the idea that, or maybe I should say reignited, the idea that this could have been like a magical ritual. Because indeed, believe it or not, people were talking about the arcane aspects of this crime right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And that's why we will close here with the satanic rituals of Dr. Donston.
Who? Donston?
Yes, Robert Donston Stevenson, a British writer and journalist who was staying at the London hospital just 150 yards from where Mary Nichols was found. Stevenson had supposedly also been a medical doctor earlier in his career. He was a military veteran. He'd been a major in the Italian army. He got around, and it sounds like at this time he was kind of an itinerant con man / self-proclaimed magician. So I don't know. Stevenson was staying at the London hospital for months.
He was staying there for like mental help, physical help.
They call it, I want to say, it's like a disease they don't have, like neuropepsia or something. They don't have
The sweating sickness.
Yes. Well, no, it's just not a disease anymore, but he basically had anxiety.
Okay.
Like a nervous breakdown almost. It was like sweating and anxiousness.
Hysteria.
Yes, that he was in the hospital for. So,
Okay.
he was staying there for the whole time these murders happened. And after the first couple, Stevenson witnessed a Dr. Morgan Davies walking around the hospital ward, demonstrating how he thought the murders might have been done, like pantomiming the and then he got her like this, and then he does this. Mm-hmm. Stevenson found this very suspicious.
I mean, it's not great bedside manner, but it's not unbelievable.
And he reached out to ironmongery salesman cum private detective George Marsh.
Wow. Okay.
He was primarily an ironmongery salesman, but he was...
What's an ironmongery?
It's a place where they make melt down iron and smelt it into ingots or into steel.
Oh, so he's just a salesman there.
Yes.
Okay.
But he was trying to make a name for himself as a self-proclaimed detective.
Sure.
George Marsh. So Marsh actually found Stevenson to be the suspicious one, and he called the police to tell them that. But the police liked him. They were like, well, this guy's a doctor. He's respectable. And they admired, they said, his interest in the investigation. So the police kind of egged him on until
This really happened?
Yes.
Okay.
So the police egged him on until Stevenson eventually published an article in the Pall Mall Gazette laying out his own theory of the case. Now, as I said, he was a self-professed magician who had kind of a hobbyist's interest in the occult. And so Stevenson claimed the murderer must have been, quote, a practitioner of black magic who had wanted the body parts for a satanic ritual. Stevenson himself then later came under suspicion since, first, he was a medical doctor, sometimes. Second, and this is weird, I did look into this a little bit, records of his wife, Anne Deary, stop in 1886. He had a wife, and then there's just no more mention of her after an 1886 item. And at some point in 1887, Stevenson started talking to him about himself as unmarried, but there's no record of a death or a divorce.
That's weird.
It is weird. And then the only thing arguing for the... So whenever someone wants to connect this whole thing to ritual, they always point to the locations of the bodies.
Right. I've heard this.
Yes. And there are only... there's 5 of them. And I don't know, if you look at just the dots on a map, they don't usually... They don't scream any particular shape to me, but they've been suggested as a cavalry cross, i.e. the cross that Jesus was crucified on, which is a Christian symbol. So I don't know, unless you were somehow inverting it on a city map.
Upside down.
Yeah. Or, in the case of, I have here Jack the Ripper's Black Magic Rituals. This isn't the... This isn't the first book to accuse Stevenson, although it does say on the cover that it has astonishing new revelations. It's sort of a spin on Jack the Ripper, The Bloody Truth, which is a 1987 work by Melvin Harris. Melvin has written 3 books saying basically the same thing.
Which is?
I just told it to you.
Oh, yes. Okay.
That this Dr. Stevenson had done all kinds of... but what I have here, this Ivor Edwards book from 2003, Jack the Ripper's Black Magic Rituals, really gets into the iconography. And remember that we're starting from 4 points on a map here, Carrie.
5.
Sorry, yes. He's discounting one of the murders as... oh, no, he's not. He's not doing... That's William Gull. So yes, 5 murders. He somehow thinks they're supposed to evoke this. And we'll put a picture of this on the website if you want to go take a look. But how would you describe the arcane symbol that is formed by these 4 dots?
How would I describe it? Well, just visually, it looks like an oval with a cross in it, a diamond, and 2 circles, like a Venn diagram in the middle. But this little chart tells me that it's an occult plan termed Vesica Pisces.
Vesica Pisces. And it's got combinations of, you can see here, Carrie, intersecting circles, crosses, a yoni, which is a vagina shape.
Oh, yes. I should know that from Goop, from Gwyneth Paltrow.
Ascending and descending pyramids, which are very important to both... Masons and Satanists, apparently.
Sure.
You know my thoughts on this, right? That there have never been Satanists in this sense.
Right.
It's never
Satanism has nothing to do with Satan, basically.
Yeah, or certainly...
Or the idea of Satan.
But things like this have never happened in the modern world, in any document that I've seen.
I'm sure some people have killed to be edgelords in the name of Satan.
Richard Ramirez did that.
Yeah, but... No, this is like a big conspiracy involving, well, maybe not this version of it, but involving royalty, involving a bunch of different people, involving magic.
And whenever people say, like, even when he describes where this author, for example, when he describes where he tracked down his information on what these symbols mean and what the symbols called and stuff, it's just like... a man who wanted to remain anonymous. I had to contact him through the mail, and then we... It's like, okay, so you can never get good sourcing on magic information.
Yeah.
Which has been a big problem for me in researching this series. But in closing, I would just like to ask you, Carrie, of all of these wonderful suspects, who do you think has the most compelling case for them that you've heard tonight?
I don't know about compelling case. I think the most fun is William Gull / royalty, because it's always fun to think the royals are up to no good, because a lot of the time they have been. But, as we talked about way back in our Princess Diana's death conspiracy series, people like to believe that because it's not too out of the realm of possibility. Both royalty and government and politics and all that stuff. They have had people killed before. They have done things that were bad. So it's not that crazy to believe that they could do something like this. But when you put on the magic element, I mean, again, it's more fun, but I don't believe it. I still think the most likely suspects we've talked about are Kosminski and Joseph Barnett. Now, whether I believe Joseph Barnett did all of them or just Mary Kelly, I'm not sure. But I think those are the most likely suspects we've at least discussed. My favorite, obviously, the royalty conspiracy. I think that's just fun. That's just, I mean, as fun as a series of murders can be, right? But it's what everyone wants this to be. They want this to be kind of a Gentleman Jack, big secret conspiracy thing because it's more fun that way. It's more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than just a guy they couldn't catch.
I agree. It's the most fun of these theories by far. I would say skip Jack the Ripper, the final solution. You just don't want anyone to see the cover you're reading and get the wrong idea.
It's just a tough title.
Instead, just read From Hell, which again really just copies the story wholesale and presents it as fiction, which it is, and it's a really, really disturbing read, and it's all pencil black and white illustrations, and yet it's so I don't know, graphic and disturbing at some times, and so expressive and emotional at other times. It's a very good work.
Yeah, it's great. I think if you're interested in the royalty conspiracy kind of made into a narrative, check out that Jack the Ripper miniseries with Michael Caine. You probably find it on YouTube or something. And if you're just interested in like a Gentleman Jack adventure story, check out Time After Time for like a full narrative film that's just a lot of fun, and no one's ever seen it. But yeah, I think we're still waiting for a good representation on the screen of what could have really happened.
Plug here for Letters from Whitechapel too. Why not?
The game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a Sherlock
Holmes...
Holmes...
just receiving letters from White... Like, if you know anybody who's going there, have them send something back.
And there's a bunch of Sherlock Holmes versus Jack the Ripper stuff, and I think some of it's supposed to be good. There are games. There's a version of the story, I think, written by the same guy who directed Time After Time.
We've played the board game Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective,
yes.
Jack the Ripper, and West End Mysteries.
Listen, anytime you get Sherlock Holmes involved, it's fun. So, I don't know. The best we can do with this story is, research what we can, but kind of take what we can from it and either create art from it or because we're not going to ever find a solution. We're not going to ever find the answer, I don't think.
But that also means the kind of fascinating bottomless well stays bottomless.
Yeah.
You'll never reach the end with Jack the Ripper because there will always be some new weird thing to say, even if we are past the point where new evidence will ever be found.
Yeah. The only thing I could see happening is some remarkable DNA type of thing. I don't think it will. I think a lot of stuff is lost or provenance is lost.
It's been handled by lots of people and kept in different rooms at this point.
Yeah. No, I think, if there's a heaven and I go there after I die, I'm going to go through the pearly gates and whoever's there is going to be like, so do you have any questions? And I'll be like, yes. And then I'll say, who killed JFK? Who was Jack the Ripper? Who killed John Benet Ramsey? I'm going to have a whole list. Jack the Ripper is definitely going to be on it.
No mention of Cooper.
Oh, it's going to be a list.
I am Dan Cooper.
I have eternity. I'm going to ask all the questions.
You might be surprised to know that not all serial killers are straight cisgender white men, and the victims of true crime are not a monolith either. She's Wendy and I'm Beth, and together we host Fruit Loops Serial Killers of Color, a true crime podcast.
Together we take deep dives into the true crime stories about marginalized and minoritized perps and victims that often go untold.
We also provide the context and nuance that these stories deserve. At Fruit Loops, we're serving up true crime with a side of history, society, culture, and some fun.
Listen to Fruit Loops Serial Killers of Color on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's Lizard People Big World. Following news of the death of Queen Elizabeth II on September 8th, we have a fresh new conspiracy theory making the rounds.
Oh, that's exciting.
About someone you might not expect.
Oh, no.
Gaining traction on TikTok is a theory...
Wait, why would we not expect a conspiracy theory to be about him at this point? It's always about him.
Spoilers. Gaining traction on TikTok is a theory that no other than Donald Trump will become the next king of the United Kingdom. The reasoning? According to Daily Dot, quote, one element of proof that Trump is to be crowned now that Queen Elizabeth II has passed away is based on him violating royal protocol by walking in front of her when he was president.
What?
A TikToker broke down the bizarre theory earlier this week. When I first saw this video, I thought he was fucking with you. You know, the way he likes to fuck with people, TikToker Proud Patriot said of Trump walking in front of the Queen. Someone told me today he's actually been knighted as a king.
Oh, knighted?
Mm-hmm.
As a king?
Yeah, I don't think that happens. This video had received 160,000 views as of September 15th. I'm sure it has received more since. While some commented with appropriate incredulity, such as one user who wrote, "It really puts it into perspective that we are living in two different realities. Wow, just wow." Others weighed in with their own ideas about the conspiracy. Donald has royalty in his family, and Melania is a Romanov. Baron the Little Prince books from the 1800s.
Explain that last part. Is that a sentence?
There is a book.
No, I know. I'm familiar with the book.
Yeah.
But it just says Baron the Little Prince books.
Well, I think there's a character limit on TikTok comments, so they're just trying to put everything in there they
Breathlessly.
can. Daily Dot notes, quote, this is a nod to yet another nonsensical theory that Trump was either given or allowed to handle the Holy Sword of Arabia, which some believe is proof he's related to the Saudi royal family, and that Baron is a time traveler.
Wait, why the time traveler part?
Because of the book.
I see.
Because of the Baron Trump book. The theory is apparently gaining traction with QAnon followers, much like the JFK Jr. theory we explored some time ago. But it's actually not a new one. Per Daily Dot, quote, 2 years ago, a QAnon conspiracy theorist known as Melissa Redpill the World, made a video claiming that Trump is in the royal line of Judah and concluding that he will one day be king of England. Melissa brought a United Kingdom-based QAnon influencer, which is a frightening
It's a whole
phrase.
genre of weird trash person.
She brought this person on her show for a rambling explanation, Daily Dot's words, about how Trump is the true heir to the British throne. For an hour, she prattled on, again, Daily Dot words, about the Stone of Destiny, read from the Bible, and finally made her way to the gold mine she'd supposedly unearthed about Trump's link to royal bloodlines. He is from both the Stuart line and from the line of kings of Denmark. That goes back to both lines of Judah, she said excitedly, presenting a slide with Trump's image in place of Elizabeth Stuart's. Elizabeth was married to Scottish aristocrat John Stuart, the 3rd Earl of Lennox, who died in 1526.
Is that how family trees work?
No. It's biblical from so many different ways, so many promises. This is restoring the rightful heir to the throne, Melissa said. So, if Donald Trump becomes King of England, well, I doubt you'd need us to update you in the event, listeners, but we'll certainly be on the story if it happens.
Oh, the memes. The memes have been terrible on this one.
Oh, yeah.
I know. The great MAGA king.
The great MAGA king, yeah. So this is a Twitter post from Mike Oxmall, Violently American, at Violently America.
Violently American?
I think it's Twitter, yeah. Breaking, the Queen is dead, so it's time for the great MAGA King Trump to take the royal crown and make America great again.
Can you read the hashtags in that, please?
Okay. Hashtag breaking, the hashtag Queen is dead, so it's time for the great hashtag MAGA, hashtag King, hashtag Trump to take the hashtag royal, hashtag crown, and hashtag make America great again.
Thank you.
Hashtag breaking news, hashtag Queen Elizabeth, hashtag RIP, hashtag King MAGA, hashtag King Trump, hashtag Trump won, hashtag Save America, hashtag Ultra MAGA, hashtag Democrats destroy America, hashtag Trump rally, hashtag Patriot, hashtag MAGA King.
Oh, they're always so pithy.
And then they have Donald Trump's head photoshopped onto the body of, I think, someone from God of War.
No, I would guess even like one of those, those mobile games like Clash of Lords.
Yes.
It's one of those.
In front of a American flag, which would be weird if he becomes King of England. And it says the Great MAGA King. So this is kind of what we're working with here.
That's certainly what England wants for their king is Mr. America first.
Yep. Who wouldn't? So that's the news, I guess.
Okay, well, what do you think the Donaldian reign is going to be like?
Oh, God.
Greasy, right?
That's it for this episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ain't It Scary, and check out our website at ain'titscary.com. You can support the show by supporting our sponsors and becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/ain'titscary. You can call us and leave a message at our Google Voice number 203-666-5529. And please subscribe to the show and throw us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We'll be forever grateful.
Yep. Special thanks, by the way, to our beloved top-tier patrons, and I encourage all of you to come over and join them if you're looking for another way to support the show. Nate Curtis, Sean O'Donnell, Jared Chamberlain, Maria Ferrante, Robin McCabe, Comfy Mike, Alex Nakutis, Ryan Regan, Christy Atchison, and Ira. We love every single one of them. Thank you, guys.
See you next Thursday.
Show created by Sean and Carrie McCabe, music by Kyle Ryan. You can find Kyle at his YouTube channel. By the way, that concert was great last week. You can find Kyle at his YouTube channel, Music is a Verb.
Ain't It Scary has been brought to you by Killer Podcasts and is a production of Longboy Media.
Listen to Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time podcast.
It's a fun show about weird stuff.
New episodes every Wednesday, ya eggheads. I'm Art.
And I'm Andy.
And Mr. Bunker's Conspiracy Time is a podcast about conspiracies, the paranormal, UFOs, unsolved mysteries. We're going to be discussing the Kennedy assassinations.
Oh, yeah, that's his nickname, Finger Banging Bob Lazar. Give me some aliens with some good frickin' spacecraft.
The whole enchilada.
The only thing bigger than Bigfoot's feet are our egos.
If you like simulation theory, ancient history, egghead science, and Mandela effect, that kind of stuff.
So check it out. New episodes every Wednesday. All the links you need on MrBunkersConspiracyTime.com.
And we'll see you in the bunker.